Well, good morning, Western Canada, good afternoon, Eastern Canada, and good day to anyone else who is joining us throughout the world. Very happy to have you join us on this panel session talking about the real-time payments platform in Canada, talking about connecting the ecosystem participants and creating new innovation there. My name is Lance Homer. I work for Equinix. I'm our head of global business development for the digital payments and banking ecosystem at Equinix. We are a global platform providing the world's digital infrastructure, and we have 15 data centers in the Canadian marketplace across 8 different metros. Just before we kick off the questions, I'd like to just go around the room and just have everyone introduce himself. I'll begin with Tyler Pichach from Microsoft Azure. Tyler, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to be here today. So I'm Tyler Pietz. I'm part of the Worldwide Financial Services team at Microsoft, and effectively we're the corporate strategy team for financial services, so banking, capital markets, and insurance. Our role is to work with our first-party engineers, our third-party ISV partners in Azure, and our strategic clients to come up with our global go-to-market strategy. My specific remit is in Latin America, Canada, and the US, and I'm a Canadian, having formerly worked at CIBC. So again, glad to be here.
Thanks, Tyler. Robert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Lance, and hi, everyone. My name is Robert Strawbridge. I run the Canada operations for Options IT. We serve as a financial sector vertical solely, and we concentrate on co-location services along with cloud services as a managed service provider.
Keith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Keith Ajmani. I run platform engineering and transformation at Interac. Hopefully a familiar brand to many people, providing banking dispensing services and of course e-transfer to the Canadian community. Excited to be here today and talk about the work we're doing.
Well, when Ramesh gets his audio figured out, we will be glad to have him join us when he can. But let me just begin here. So recently, Payments Canada selected a couple of vendors to run their real-time payments platform that include Interac and Vocalink, or Interac and Vocalink. And so really happy to have both those companies here on today's panel. So let me just start out with Keith. You know, as you know, Interac, you already have kind of broad connectivity in the financial ecosystem in Canada. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that right now and how that's going to increase, decrease, and how that relates to kind of what you'll be doing with real-time payments for Payments Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Interac has a long history of connecting the financial ecosystem in Canada. You know, our roots originally were running the ABM network across the country, but now we have a multi-platform, multi-product offering. But we've always prioritized connectivity to make sure that Canadians can benefit from convenient money movement no matter where they live. We often like to say we're connected to nearly 300 financial institutions, credit unions, and Caisse Populaire across all different sizes of spectrum across Canada. And it's these connections that allowed us to sort of scale and grow Interac to the point where now the vast majority of Canadians have access to debit card services and regularly used services like Interac e-transfer. So yeah, we feel like we've been part of the growth and the evolution of the financial ecosystem across Canada.
Very good. Now, how do you expect maybe this connectivity or growth to change as kind of you bring on, you know, the real-time rail for Payments Canada?
Yeah, it's a great question. The decision-making rights with respect to connectivity into the Payments Canada real-time rail obviously rest with Payments Canada and the government of Canada. But you know, our goal is to leverage our existing connectivity and reach and our experience running the e-transfer platform as we go in to build the RTR. But there will be broader reach, and you know, there will be new types of participants in the ecosystem. But with full interoperability across that ecosystem from the existing environment and into the new type classes of participants that Payments Canada will bring onto the system. You know, the core technological components of that real-time rail will be very similar to what we see in market. You know, it's a good funds model. It's ubiquitous across the country. It's a real-time money transfer and governed by the financial institutions and by Payments Canada. But we're excited to see the RTR come because it will provide new ways for Canadians to pay for goods and services, and we think that will, allow people to have faster payroll. Gig economy is a big example that comes up quite a bit in terms of being able to pay in much more real time. So we will see new ways of connecting into the payment systems evolve with the RTR, and I think it will just become even broader in terms of Canadians that can be reached through the system and the companies that can integrate into it and initiate payments.
That's great. So you've talked about this connectivity from a broader ecosystem, and certainly at Equinix, one of the things I've seen, we have 8 national payment system operators doing real-time payments and other batch systems inside of Equinix, is the importance of connectivity to the cloud. Tyler, I'm going to be coming to you at this. So, maybe you could give me a little bit of a landscape of cloud adoption in the Canadian marketplace versus other markets. Certainly, we see it very important for these real-time payment platforms to be able to embrace the fintechs or cloud natives, but also banks are transitioning into the cloud and want that connectivity. So maybe you could just give me a little bit of overview of the Canadian marketplace.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe I'll do a bit of an outside in. So if we look at globally what's happening when it comes to cloud, it's taken off in a massive way. Microsoft has seen 50% year over year. Actually, I think it's quarter over quarter growth for the past many quarters. So it's not just Microsoft, of course, our competitors are doing the same. And so everyone is embracing the reality, especially due to COVID, where people are trying to say, what do we focus on from a core business perspective? And then what can cloud enable us to do as our competitors are already there? So hyper focus on getting to cloud. When it comes to Canada and specifically in banking, the journey's really begun. Most of the banks in the country have started their journey to cloud, typically done from looking at Office as an example, but then starting to take a look at what are their critical pieces of infrastructure like payments that they want to move to the cloud. Most of it's confidential, so I can't talk about names, so to speak, but I can certainly tell you that the move is significant. We've got some pretty big players that have made some very, very recent and very, very big moves. And so we certainly see that most of the other banks in Canada are going to follow. If we think about some of the drivers specifically to payments, seeing probably a bit more activity in the payments realm in Europe. And really, we think that the big driver there we're seeing is around open banking, PSD2, and really lands for what you talked about around the fintechs are there. And they're agile, they can make changes on the fly. The business driver is saying, can I compete? Versus, like my old days at CIBC, it was every time you want to do a change, it was 6 months and $500,000 kind of thing. So how can we be more agile? And so again, in Europe, that's taking place and organizations are following suit, especially the big banks. In addition to that, the big payments providers are also, getting into the game, so to speak. So if you think about FIS, Fiserv, Mastercard, Vocalink, Finastra, Volante, all of the big players, and most of all of those, actually, I think all the ones I just mentioned are in Azure as their primary cloud. So super exciting. And so Microsoft's perspective is to help enable those players to go into market, to be able to help their customers be successful in that transfer to cloud.
Very good. All right. Well, I certainly see kind of, a shift in the marketplace right now where people are embracing cloud and exiting their on-prem data centers and moving kind of payment hubs into the edge to connect, to cloud providers like Azure. Robert, you've gone back a little bit in the infrastructure side of building infrastructure for financial services companies. Maybe you can share a little bit from your perspective. You've done a little bit on not just payments and banking, but on the electronic trading side of financial services. You've seen kind of a motion where the speeds and feeds really grew and latency became important. Is, in the Canadian terminology, is that where the puck is headed? Is what do you see kind of with ecosystem connectivity for the new RTR in Canada?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it on the head there, Lance. So if you look at capital markets, as a line of business, for instance, that's pushed itself heavily into cloud and colo, and then you look at payments infrastructure, which traditionally is super sensitive, needs incredible resiliency and uptime. That's just an expectation. That's table stakes to get in. When you combine that with latency, and the reason why I highlight that, like you said, Lance, is RTR is really going to change the conversation, right? I don't think that RTR is necessarily going to focus on uptime and resiliency. That's table stakes to be there. But from a latency and speed perspective, people are now going to start to realize who has the best infrastructure, who has the best connectivity. Time is no longer going to be in days, months, weeks, hours. It's going to be almost instantaneous, right? I think RTR is really going to pivot some of the historical challenges we've had in the payments industry in terms of reconciliation and settlement. And it's going to shine a big light on who has the best, not only software, but infrastructure setup, whether that's using it on-prem, in cloud, or in colo.
Keith, going back to you, we talked earlier just kind of about where this innovation is going to come from on the real-time rail. When I spoke previously, is this a platform for innovation that the traditional financial institutions can build upon, or is it going to be coming from the fintechs? Where, what do you see in the marketplace here for the RTR?
Yeah, I don't think it's from any one place, like A or B. I think both can. I think if you look, there's been a history of innovation for payments in Canada. Like Canadians in general have been at the forefront of adopting innovation in payments, whether it was debit cards, where we have huge acceptance footprint, technology obviously we've brought to market, like such as e-transfer, that are similar. But I think it's been a lot of focus on the consumer and the retail side of the market, and where I would see a huge opportunity is in the corporate world. There's room for improvement there. There's a lot of use of legacy payment types. Checks are declining for consumer use, but believe it or not, they're still rising or staying flat for businesses, and some businesses don't want to give them up yet. But there are advantages to moving to more of a real-time payments model for the corporate customers, especially around the data that can travel with the payment as well. We talk about a lot with, this new data and new types of payments is carrying the data with it, right? And that will just help reduce manual processing that companies do by being able to actually give information about the payment rather than just showing up. And so I think once you have more data there, I think if you look around the world, right, how do people make money? You don't pay for Facebook, you don't pay for Google, and you know exactly why, right? They're using your data. Not that we're going to sell anyone's data or that Payments Canada would, but I think there's a huge value in having more data with transactions, and that will help the businesses and their banks and fintechs and competitors in the market as well to find creative new ways to use that data in the environment. And so from a consumer standpoint, competition is beneficial to the consumers, right? Different options, different innovations, and so having new entrants into the marketplace will mean new offerings and competitive pricing and competitive services for all Canadians.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, you've raised some interesting points there. It's really the real-time payments for me is not about just making payments happen more quickly. It is about the data. Interac is a very unique value proposition that you've driven down the price for moving money quite a bit compared to other markets, which makes Canada very unique, especially compared to the U.S. where I sit. But for where there's more fragmentation and competition in the marketplace, really the movement of money is starting to be commoditized to some degree, and I really do see the value in the data taking place and shape there. I go back to before I focused on payments and banking. My role was in the capital market space, and back in the day, if you were making a trade on you would pay $20 a trade, and that became all you can eat for $20 a month. Now you've got high frequency algorithmic traders who are doing trades, tens of thousands of trades per second. And they may maybe only making a penny or two on it, but really the market data around those trades became very valuable. And I've certainly seen that kind of transition happening where data at the edge becomes important. Robert, you've kind of seen that play out before. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience in that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the capital market space, that's definitely a trend, a well-known trend as well. I mean, $20 a trade, I would have loved to have dealt with you, Lance. That's fantastic. I think what I would highlight is RTR is going to allow people to manage their liquidity in real time and be able to do things that they would have had to have waited a few days or at least a day, right, in order to do that when you look at some of the same day settlements things. So I think from a consumer perspective or corporate perspective, there's going to be a huge shift, not just on the data that's available and the enrichment that occurs with RTR, but also in the ability to manage your exposure immediately. And that's going to drive other facets of your business. I think it's fantastic that it's happening when it's happening. And I think the timing is, honestly, it just couldn't be better. In terms of data, I mean, I think there's going to be, I've mentioned this before in our other conversations, Lance, a big shift in moving the query to the data instead of the data to the query, which historically has been bringing everything on-prem, trying to do it there. I think with Interac, Microsoft, Mastercard, having those various data pieces is going to be huge, and it's going to be really advantageous to anyone who partakes in RTR.
Yeah, very good. So just a reminder to all those that are participating or watching this session, feel free to jump in the room chat, ask us a question. We'll try to get to those as we talk, and we'll save some time at the end also. But would love to see your questions about connecting this real-time rail ecosystem in Canada, how it can drive innovation. So we're talking a little bit about the value of data, and Tyler, you certainly see a lot of data moving across the Azure cloud environment. Maybe you could just give me a little update about how you see data playing a role in helping support fraud detection and real-time payments, but also creating new value for the customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, data is really Microsoft's sweet spot across a number of different areas. But specific, when we think about payments and where data is going, absolutely decrease in fraud and AML. We're seeing, consortiums starting to be stood up, including conversations in Canada around consortiums for AML, consortiums for fraud, and the payments, part of it, whether it's onboarding or at the actual time of payment, is really important to that. Certainly, Robert, as you talked about, data for straight-through processing, automated reconciliation, really excited to see things in the future coming through around, digital contracts. The idea of data flowing with a payment and the contract happening at the same time, that then, goes through the ERP systems like Dynamics and can be, automated all the way through. We're also seeing data from an aggregation perspective from a central bank side of things. So not just, thinking about what Payments Canada or the Bank of Canada wants to do with it to do better government forecasting, but, across the board, regions around the world. I think last time I looked, there were 40 plus different global regions that were doing things around faster payments. All of them from a government perspective are looking at saying, if we can move the data along with the payment faster, they're looking at GDP shifts of, anywhere from 2 to 5%. Which is massive. So really, really exciting. And then, the last thing from a data perspective, and, I don't have the answer on this, but certainly would love if people that are listening in could, weigh in is, with the advent of RTR and the data comes with it, what's that going to mean when we start getting into digital currencies? And so, where's that puck going to go, if you'll pardon the playoff pun? So super exciting. And then from a Microsoft perspective, obviously we have all the tools that we think are required to be able to support that, whether it's on the analytics side, confidential data sharing, super important. So I think the idea of what could be done with data, 5 years ago didn't exist to what it can actually do today. And so I think that's a super, exciting place to be in and be able to support. The last thing that I would say about data, which I think is really important, is, and specifically around the RTR in terms of it opening up access for others. One of the things that Microsoft, of course, is very closely watching is what's happening with Googleplex specifically, what's happening with Amazon, and where that's going to take banking in the next 5 years. And we have a lot of our customers that are quite honestly frightened about that. Because, they're already Google, Amazon, they're going to be banks. They have banking licenses that are popping up, not Google yet, but Amazon's there, and I'm sure Google will follow. And so, what does that mean to data? Who owns that data? How's it going to work in those ecosystems? So our view is, if we can do it through the RTR in a open, ecosystem way where truly the clients own their own data, I think that's where we're going to be successful and allow banks to be competitive in the future.
Very good. So I hope Ramesh can join us, but there's a question I was going to ask him, and I'm just going to throw this out to the group here. You know, what we're seeing here is you mentioned, Tyler, I think you said 40, but I think it's from FIS's Flavors of Fast report. I think it's, you know, upwards of 55, 60 that are live or soon to be live with real-time payments around the world. As they move the ISO 20022 standard, it becomes a common language that makes it easier to exchange data, and that, you know, and build these common payment hubs. You know, if a bank can start, you know, deploying in different markets, connecting these things. Ultimately, I think we're going to see a rise of kind of a network of networks that begin to connect many of these out there. Certainly, some of those that would be the obvious participants, and that would be a Mastercard or a Visa or a Swift. But I think some of the other non-traditionals and even perhaps some fintechs could play that role. I'm just going to throw this out to the panel. If you have, I was going to ask Ramesh this, but since he's not here, just, you know, how do you see kind of this change into, you know, real-time rail operation creating innovation across cross-border? Maybe Keith, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I can comment. I think it's so ISO is a standard. Like any good standard, every standard is implemented differently by everybody and in every different country. So it's a progress towards a global standard, but don't assume it's a holy grail. In the instant that Canada is on ISO, suddenly we have perfect interoperability with the rest of the world. But it is a huge step forward, and I think it's a structure to carry more data when some of the global standards today don't let you carry very much data. But what's exciting, you know, happening in the global payments world is obviously they are moving to ISO 20022 in a more flexible format on the wires, on the cross-border payments side. So that's where you'll see really broad cross-border adoption of data-rich payments first. You know, I think our focus right now has got to be get it done right in Canada first. And then, because if you saw the keynote this morning with Tracy Black, you know, next year we have real-time rail coming. Not right after that is the SWIFT, right? And then you'll start to see the cross-border payments coming. So I think we'll be well set up, especially with our major partner in the U.S. as a cross-border trading partner, one of the largest, global back and forth economies in the world, to be able to exchange payments with there as well. And I think we have very good relationships within the Canadian banking community over to, you know, the real-time networks in the U.S. as well, like the Clearinghouse. The Fed has announced they're going to build something. So I think you're going to see it. And so I think starting from a place of common standards will make that a lot easier. But there will still be some work ahead.
Robert, you know, Keith kind of mentioned kind of the difference of adoptions of the protocol of ISO 20022. I mean, you've seen that with the fixed protocol and people kind of stepping in, kind of being a normalizer for the different nuances between the, you know, protocols, different marketplaces. You perhaps see that, and, you know, what's the lesson learned from other industries?
Yeah, I mean, because Canada's not the first in the world to do this, obviously, I think there's probably a good amount of lessons learned already. To Keith's point, I don't necessarily think it'll be a holy grail now that we've moved on to it, or in the process of, rather, but I would say that in the long run, it's going to be super beneficial for everyone to have some form of consistency and wrapper around it. In terms of fixed protocol, that was definitely noticed in the trading industry. And now, even though that standard has many augmentations of it and permutations, it is a baseline for the entire industry and capital markets for what they've been built on. And I think payments will follow a similar structure. Tyler,
anything you want to add to this, or just take a pass?
Hey, listen, I don't take a pass on things. I'd love to add to. Listen, I think that one of the most exciting pieces around payments is going to be in the trade finance piece. When we start thinking about cross-border, I think there's just a ton of white space, we'll say, in order to course correct legacy, generations, if you will, of how trade finance has been done. And so, really eager to understand how the real-time rail and Interac can help support that as a future use case.
Very good. I want to take a question from one of our audience members. The question is, there's lots of benefits associated with moving to real-time payments. what are some of the risks and downside? Keith, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think if you look at where we're going to get at the end of RTR, I think it's actually fundamentally we're taking a lot of risks out of the system today, especially if you look from the Bank of Canada perspective with respect to settlement risk. Robert touched on this earlier, right? Done with a lot of our payments in Canada are settled next day, right? So intraday until the next day you have risk. So one of the fundamental things that will come out of the RTR system is settling all of those real-time payments and even non-real-time payments the same day as they're gone. So that actually takes risk out. But to answer the specific question, there's always risk with change, right? So it's a large program. It touches every existing financial institution, credit union, case pop around the world, around Canada rather, that's integrated. And so you have an ecosystem change risk. So that's always complex because they have to make changes and then they need to test together. We have a really robust testing regimen in place for the launch of the RTR. We have development by the different parties that are producing the system. We have extensive integration testing between those parties. And then we have an extensive industry testing prior to that as well. And it's a pattern that Payments Canada is following on. There are other major payment modernization was just ahead of us, which is Link. So I think they're going to have an excellent track record of sort of validating these changes in advance. But I think that's a risk I see. And all change has risk. I think it's been well mitigated. Downside, not trying to be a cheerleader for it. I'm struggling to see a downside of it. You're going to have a system that's removed some systemic risk. You've broadened access into payments for Canada, and you've allowed more data to travel to payments. Tough to see a downside, I guess, off the cuff. But maybe the other gentlemen on the call have an idea.
Yeah, let me just toss over to Robert first, then. Where do you see some risks in this space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I see like two very simple risks, right? You have the edge case, and this one's very basic, so bear with me. Of someone who's used to writing a check that they know isn't going to be cashed, is going to take time to cash. In reality, RTR means this is instant. Checks are going to go the way of the dinosaur. I think that's a super edge case, but I thought it was an interesting one that was brought up. And then the second one is people who adopt RTR, which effectively is going to be everyone. You're used to having that buffer of whether it's a few hours or it's a day or next day, where you can sort of figure out your settlement, your reconciliation process. In a capital market sense, doing the trade used to be the hard part. It's no longer the hard part, right? It's actually everything else that follows. People are expecting that the transaction is flawless, right? So in RTR, I think what we're going to end up seeing is companies will be defined effectively by how well that occurs. And people are going to be able to see in real time or near real time whether or not that went well. Whereas before, it just appeared to go well, and you would have no idea behind the scenes what was occurring. So I think just from a public perspective, like that's going to shape the conversation a little bit in a way that we're just not used to.
I want to come back to I've got some questions for you about that you brought up there, but before I come back to that, Tyler, what's your thought about some of the risks that might be faced by the real-time rail?
Yeah. Just to add one more is really when we think about the limits. So increasing limits in some jurisdictions, I think they've got no limits. Others, significantly higher. In the UK, I think going up to £500,000. So imagine moving from today's e-transfer, which is capped at 3,000. I think it's still 3,000 depending on the bank, maybe 10. Then moving to a $500,000 transaction, like massive risks in terms of doing that. And so this is where I think we really have to be thoughtful about what fraud controls go across all participants, including the small ones. And I think that might be a bit of a barrier to entry in terms of being able to participate. And so obviously we don't want to have that. So how to do that? And that comes back to the data and the idea of consortium fraud and, enabling tools that can still help smaller parties remove the risk that inherently is going to be like fraudsters are going to be all over this going, hey, it's Christmas.
Any new system, yeah. The other thing I would just mention is obviously we do have very high value payments in Canada as well that are available today to retail consumers. They can send wires, not on e-transfer. Those are good funds, real-time systems, and obviously the financial institutions have implemented, being able to manage fraud on those ones, where they're tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars per payment. But it's the scale, I think, it's a thing, Tyler, right? If they do 50 to 100,000 total of those high value payments across all of Canada in a day versus, millions of, as an example, e-transfers per day, then it's the scale, right? And any new system always attracts the fraudsters to try and crack it and find them. So that'll be a very important risk to mitigate as we go live.
Absolutely. I think the fraud, that's I think it's misattributed, but people try to rob this bank, so that's where the money is at, and this is just a quicker way to get in and out. But I think I have faith in the system, that things will that the technology will keep up with the way that the fraudsters will go after. Also there's the chance of fat fingering, accidentally sending a payment to a supplier that you owe money to, that you didn't want to pay as much as you intended to pay, but they take the full balance. I think we saw a bank do that a while back, and those are some risks here with movement of money. I'm going to go back to you, Robert. You kind of talked about this, I can't remember how you phrased it, but a better experience in the process. We're talking a little bit. I think one of the things you said way earlier was moving the query to the data versus moving the data to the query. The question I have is kind of, you've been a builder of infrastructure all throughout the world for financial service companies. Can you maybe talk a little bit about kind of, this is going to be a broad ecosystem with lots of different participants. Some may sit in Azure, some may sit in Colo, some may sit in Calgary, some may sit in Kamloops. Can you talk about kind of the importance of the connectivity for multi-cloud connectivity and being able to quickly turn up connectivity to participants, the importance of latency, robustness for creating that end experience that is seamless on the back end, so the customer on the front end's going, wow, that worked. I don't even know how it worked, but it worked well. So talk to the people who are the other builders on this call, and to give them kind of an idea of what you're thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think COVID-19 actually really changed the world. And I don't think that I know that for a fact, but I would say that part of that was actually shifting companies into more of, and you might appreciate this, Lance, like a boundless state or a boundless world, right? Whereas before, everyone was in the office, everyone was doing things sort of like point to point, if you will. And now everything is expected to be turned on at any point, and you're expected to be able to reach anyone everywhere, regardless of their geographic location. So you'll see, and I'm sure Tyler will speak to this as well, but you'll see the importance of edge nodes coming into play. Big shout out to Microsoft, who's opening up one in Vancouver. I think that's going to do wonders for Canada as a whole. From an Azure perspective, not everything will be concentrated just in, effectively Montreal and Toronto from a data center viewpoint. I also think people are going to need to start leveraging not just connectivity from on-prem, but from co-location. And that's where you have your 15 some odd data centers from Equinix, or 100 plus around the world, depending on when we do cross-border, et cetera. I think it's going to fundamentally change how we architect applications, but also our view of infrastructure, and what it means to truly be boundless and everywhere, because our clients are everywhere. Creating that experience is going to be challenging, but clients will be able to tell those who are doing it well from those who are not. And real-time rail, I've said this a couple times already, but it's really going to change the conversation around how people perceive payments inside the country. And it's going to be a big shift that everyone needs to be ready and prepared for.
Yeah, I recently read a really amazing article. I put it in the room chat from Vala Offshore from Salesforce, talking about the new business operating model that's arisen from COVID-19, like you mentioned, which is this boundless company. So you're that really resonated with me. If you've not read that article, go click on that link. Tyler, do you want to add anything to what Robert said there? He invoked your name.
Yeah. I mean, hey, listen, I totally agree. I think Microsoft, we have a complete understanding that people are going to want to be for a long time on-prem and in the cloud. And so, especially when we think about what some banks in Canada call digital crown jewel assets, of which payments are many of those. The ledger that the bank has, mainframes, going to be on-prem for a long, these are big things to move. And so the ability to communicate not only to whatever network it's going to be, the real-time rail in this case, whatever infrastructure is moving to cloud and the connectivity down to its on-prem pieces is going to be super important to make the whole ecosystem work and speak to each other in the right way. So we're heavily invested in helping our customers do that. And again, it's a pathway for the foreseeable future.
So just again, we're kind of needing about 15 minutes left in this session here. So if you have questions, please keep typing in the room chat here. One of the questions that came in was that, Tyler, you had mentioned underlying concerns from clients about data privacy with emerging big techs. What are the expectations for the real-time rail to be able to address this? Would open that up to you first, and maybe Keith, if you want to jump in about kind of privacy concerns for data.
Yeah, I mean, there will be rules, absolutely, that Payments Canada will set around the data and the use of that data. So they will govern that. I can tell you from our perspective, security is paramount in everything that we're doing in our design. It's fundamental, and it's security on another level from what you might have ever seen before. And this is for us in the center running the system. This is on the participants and the financial institutions and the members of Payments Canada initiating and managing payments. So I think the controls that those financial institutions and the deposit holding institutions and the transaction processors are there is very significant. It's reviewed, it's audited by Payments Canada, and it's a compliance regime, right? The space is less well-defined yet for some emerging folks to do it, but I think there's, I'll put this the most delicate way, there's emerging legislation potentially coming on this to manage it. I think there is risk, right? If you have players who have less specific oversight, managing and having access to payments, they see a slice of it, they see a smaller piece of it. In the center, we would see all of the payment, right? So it's a very different lens. But I think that's something that's going to need to be addressed in a balanced way, right? You can't stifle the innovation, but you also have to manage what happens with customers' data. And just go visit, have I been pwned.net or not, right? To find out how many breaches of data there have been done, including by people like Facebook, 500 million emails recently, right? So, or phone numbers. So it's really important to safeguard it. I'll pause there.
Yeah, I know, Tyler, this kind of question was maybe asked to you, but I know that Azure's made a big push towards kind of governance of data, particularly in financial services in the cloud environment. Maybe, you could talk about kind of the tools that are in place that Azure's taking to help making sure that data is secure.
Yeah, so So listen, Microsoft spends over $1 billion a year on data security, and yet things like SolarWinds happen. I think some of the lessons learned there are that as much as organizations like Microsoft and Interac and others are hyper focused on security, it is a large ecosystem. Like Keith, you hit the nail on the head. There will be smaller players that how do you make sure that they are, whether it's legislation or otherwise, in the same vein of understanding data security and how to deal with that. So I think it's a tough nut to crack. And then the other side too, with real-time rail, as we talked about earlier, there's going to be a ton more data that's flowing through the system than ever was before. There's going to be many, many more participants than there were before. It's not just the big banks, right? This is meant to be an open ecosystem. And so how do we control that? I think that Microsoft doesn't have all the answers. I think it's one of those conversations that we need to make sure the industry as a whole has an ongoing part of it. I think that, we've recently announced our work in decentralized ID. And I think that whether it's Microsoft or somebody else doing that, I think participant, authentication and identification is going to be a key part of how we maintain security in the real-time rail world or security in general in Canada. So it's a ton more work to do, and we're going to continue to find gaps, right? I mean, this is just the way these things work. So it's about how we are proactive about those gaps, and when they do happen, how quickly can we fix them?
Yeah, there's a great paper about decentralized ID that Azure. I do encourage people to read it. I don't have a link for it right now, but certainly, you know, I'm on a panel next month talking about tokenization, security, things like that, and decentralized ID plays a key role in that. I mean, you know what? One of the things that when I think about it, somebody asked me what's the future of payments, I say it's, you know, three things. It's instant, it's open, and everywhere. Instant, you know, talking about this move from batch to real time. Open, embracing these APIs and the pub sub streams that are out there for events, and then everywhere, meaning connecting from Colo to cloud, from Kamloops to Calgary or whatever. I see kind of, you know, when I look at kind of this question around data security and things of that nature, you've got these challenges around this embracing this open banking where people, it's their data, they want access to, you know, give access to third parties to it. Now, in some markets, the regulators have gone out and mandated, particularly like in the European marketplace, saying, you know, what can happen with the data. The US, where I sit, has a more business-driven approach here. And, you know, and banks like Chase, who have strong market share and can, you know, fintechs need to connect to, have gone out and created these, you know, third-party agreements. That's not a possibility for the thousands of other smaller banks out there. So, you know, when I look at this, there's going to have to be some rationalizations across not just the Canadian marketplace individually, but globally, because these banks are doing things globally because they can't have different sets of rules in every single marketplace. So I see, you know, I think there's going to have to be a federated effort to come up with some standardizations for how the banks want to make sure that the customer's data is secure, because ultimately that's, you know, security and trust is the key to the bank's relationship with the customers. So let's, I think, Tyler, you may have raised a thing about central bank digital currency, CBDCs, right? There's a question from the room asking, how would one balance the expectation of relative anonymity on the part of the consumer using such currencies versus the data associated collected with their usage? I don't know if that's, you want to try to take that, Tyler?
I'm not sure I understand the question fully. You know, I think maybe the first question is, you know, is the CBDC going to be, you know, just like regular fiat currency, which is when you send an RTR in the future, it's going to be just like, you know, sending anything out of your account today. And so maybe that's the first piece. And then the second piece, if it is, then if it's, you know, sending the data alongside with that, is that just the same? In which case there's no difference. So I don't know the answer to that question, both. I think it's something I have to dig into further.
Very good. All right, so how do you touch there? All right, anyone else want to take?
I think, yeah, I can comment. I mean, quite different paradigms, a CBDC or a cryptocurrency, not equating the two versus what the RTR will be. I mean, payments run by, you know, Payments Canada, run by, you know, oversight from the Bank of Canada, Department of Finance. They do know who you are. They're going to know who you are, right? Just like any other electronic funds transfer that exists in the country today. You know, in the future, could someone be innovative and, you know, implement a sort of obfuscated payment scheme on top of RTR? Absolutely. You could develop ways. I think that's an innovation opportunity, right? You could have a startup, a fintech that creates a payment scheme that anonymizes people and just moves it between anonymous bank accounts on both ends. Whoever patents this idea, Milosh, if you're listening, I want a piece of this patent. You know, you can do that on top, but inherently the system will know the originating and receiving entities. And I think that's fundamental how that system works. And maybe Rob was going to add something there.
I think you nailed it, right? I think it's super important to segregate cryptocurrency versus blockchain or even cryptocurrency against RTR, right? The Canadian bank or decentralized currency, whenever they decide to move forward with that project, inherently they will know you and what you're doing with that currency. That's built in as a default assumption, just like in RTR. And our country has some of the strongest KYC and AML rules in the world. And it's part of the reason we are who we are as a as a global force inside of Canada, and it's also why we have all of our banks following the same common denominator when it comes to that. So I don't necessarily think that RTR will change that. I think if anything, there'll be more data enrichment, which isn't necessarily used to know exactly who you are from a security perspective, but more in terms of fixing middle and back office challenges that occur throughout the normal payments lifecycle and making that process as smooth as possible.
Yeah, without getting CSIS or anyone on me in the future, I think people do have a right to some level of privacy.
Yes.
And we do support cash and non-traceable transactions today. So I don't know that the complete surveillance state is the right place for Canada to land, but at a certain threshold of a dollar value of a transaction or a volume of transactions, you do need to know a little bit more KYC about somebody, right? You can't show up and buy a house with 2 duffel bags full of cash. Someone will ask questions. So I think there's a calibration threshold there, but you should be able to have, I should be able to buy something on Kijiji and not have to have it ping back and have the government know I bought a new bike or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a balance.
It is a delicate balance between allowing freedom of speech with what people transact, but also preventing money laundering and things of that nature. And so, I mean, you look at all over the world. I mean, India moving to demonetizing some of their currencies to what's happening in Hong Kong with some of the protests, tracking transactions, things like that. Finding that balance is critical. I don't know that we're going to have the answer here today. This may be the last question here, but I'm going to go around the horn here, but I'll start with myself. The question is, from a technology perspective, it seems like we are creating a strong backbone for everyone in the market. Is that sufficient for Canada to attract global fintechs to come and operate in Canada, like Zelle's, Revolut's, or Venmo's? I'm excited about what's happening in the Canadian marketplace. There is a lot of opportunity for innovative growth for fintechs to not only come in internationally, but also for the Canadian fintechs that are born in Canada to reach out to connect to the rest of the world and bring Canada to the rest of the world with some of the innovations. As I mentioned earlier, Equinix has 8 national payment system operators that will have infrastructure in our data centers. And when Canada released their vision for modernization and some of their RFPs for what their plans were, I was highly, highly impressed with that they did not just consider just the domestic implications for this, but the international implications for kind of creating an innovative platform. And that's kind of why I chose this topic to discuss this innovation with the platform. I see the Canada, is really positioned well for bringing in fintechs to compete, for bringing new innovative solutions with this modernization of their payments infrastructure. Tyler, fintechs, cloud go together. Let me just toss that over to you. Do you think how do you see this play out?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's lots here. It's a lot of fun when I talk to especially our American colleagues about Zelle and how Fed now is moving to faster payments, and they're very excited about this thing called request pay. And I laugh and say, I think we know what that is. So I think we've been doing a lot of really great things in the payment industry in Canada, and I think that the real-time rail is going to continue that trend in terms of doing things first, largely at a global scale. And so that makes others outside of Canada, whether it's fintechs or other ecosystem players, networks like Zelle, really interested in terms of what it is that we're doing. And I'm hopeful that not only will they want to participate, but even if they exist outside of Canada, they'll want to connect. The idea of connecting rails, whether it's NPP in Australia, whether it's Zelle in the US, whether it's the UK faster payment system, I think is really exciting. Again, getting to that idea of global trade, which is as the world continues to shrink, so much more important than it was before. So super excited.
Robert, what's your take on modernization and being able to cultivate fintechs coming into the Canadian marketplace?
I mean, I think over the last year, and Lance, I'm sure you know this, we host a number of fintechs in the Canadian space right now, most of which are either in Tyler's Azure, if you will, or in Lance's Equinix data centers globally. And I think over the last year, Canada has just exploded in terms of this, and the amount of people that are coming to the table with ideas and the funding that's coming out, especially towards the latter end, the venture funding and private equity funding towards the latter end of COVID at the moment. So I think there's a lot in the pipe that's coming down, and personally, I'm pretty excited for us as a country. Like, I think we're going to see big things.
Keith, I'm going to give you a final word on this.
Yeah, I think so. I think absolutely. It's going to be a platform, and I think what's coming will bring in that competitive marketplace. Absolutely. I think there's work we've already think about fintechs and doing payments and across the border. We didn't have Ramesh here for this whole call, so I have to give him at least a shout out. We as Interac launched a cross-border payment with Mastercard last year with Mastercard Send, right? So I mean, we're kind of big on the fintech scale, obviously, but we have seen some of the the global payments coming into play, and I think we will continue to see them come into the market and watch. Zelle. It was very interesting to watch Zelle launch over the last few years. It feels a lot like e-transfer. We had good conversations with them as they came to market. So I think the people can come to Canada. I think they can learn a lot from what, to Tyler's point, what Canada's already been doing, whether it's Interac or others. A lot of very creative, competitive folks out there doing stuff in the business space as well. Folks like Wave and Pluto. They're just doing really, really innovative things on top of the existing payment rails that we have. But continuing to modernize them and make them faster and more accessible is just going to continue to drive that innovation.
That's a great final thing there. Well, I just want to thank everyone that has joined and watched this session today. I hope it's a great week for you attending the other sessions for Payments Canada. I feel like we got a great spot being the opening panel session for the first day. And really had a stellar panel. Thank you, Tyler, Robert, Keith, and Ramesh. I know you're listening and on here. We missed you. We missed the insights that you would have brought to this discussion. I think VocaLink was a great choice by Payments Canada. I'm very familiar with kind of the relationship with VocaLink and some other markets where Equinix operates, what they're doing, some of the innovative things there with connectivity to the clouds and fintechs and things of that nature. So again, thank you for your willingness to join, and appreciate the panelists. And to everyone else, have a great Monday. And I am going to go on my Memorial Day holiday here in the US. So thank you very much.